was a better country they longed for, a heavenly country. And so God is not ashamed for them to call him their God, because he has prepared a city for them. You join me in a quick word of prayer. God, may these ancient words from our ancestors in faith bless us in many new ways. And may all our meditations in this sanctuary call us to a future of deeper love, deeper hope, and deeper gratitude. Amen.
Amen. So, Isaac, would you begin by telling us more about this book called Hebrews in general, and especially the importance of these particular verses that we extracted from that book?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to take a quick moment for privilege to those. That's what is lovely to see so many people in the sanctuary, so many people who have raised me, who have been here for so long. And forgive me when I forget what I'm talking about, because I've already been making eye contact with so many of you. And that's a really special moment for me. So, back on track. The book of Hebrews. So again, even to start even broader than the book of Hebrews, why are we looking at the book of Hebrews today? In the New Revised Lectionary, which we are following for today's sermon, it is a calendar of scriptures of where people in the world are reading all from the same Bible today. So Christians from around the world are gathering in sanctuaries and all sorts of different types of churches, all meditating on these words and asking, what do they mean? Why are they important? How do they call us to live a life of faith? So I like to picture this book of Hebrews, our lectionary reading today, kind of like a big door. That's what, if you've been to those big fancy churches that have those ginormous doors, or maybe a castle where it looks like the king could ride in on a horse, or maybe even an elephant because it's so large. And on that door, the author of Hebrews has all of these different panels with different pictures of all sorts of things that people from the Old Testament, Hebrew people, would find familiar. So if you could just imagine this ginormous door, and in each square panel, maybe one would be Abraham being told by God that he was going to be the father of many, many, many children and create a whole nation. And that through him, God would bless all the nations. Maybe the next panel would be Moses talking to the burning bush, and then the Hebrews escaping from Egypt. We have this ginormous door filled with all of these important stories that we know, that ancient people absolutely would know. And that would be the first 10 chapters of Hebrews. And then we are now at the 11th chapter. And at that 11th chapter, I like to imagine that the author is inviting us to slowly open that door, to kind of see what is going on behind it. What is the author kind of leading us to? And the funny thing about each of those panels that the author is doing in Hebrews is that he's saying, this is the greatest part of the Old Testament. Here is Abraham, here is Moses doing these amazing things. And he says every time, he develops a pattern that he says, but Jesus is greater. And it's fascinating. He does it again and again and again. He takes a look at Abraham, at Moses, at the high priests making sacrifices. And every time he says, this is pointing to somewhere. This is pointing us to Jesus. So it's bizarre when we open that door in the 11th chapter. So that's what I would imagine that then we would just completely be talking about Jesus and where we're going from there, straight into the future. And the author does something funny. First, he starts off with this definition of faith. He talks about things that are unseen, but having faith that they are still real. And instead of pointing straight to Jesus, he comes back and he talks about Abraham. And he says, this is an important descendant. This is someone who we care deeply, deeply for. And it's very bizarre why he does it. But I like to think that he's reminding us again and again that our ancestors in faith are somebody who's important to us, calling us back to remember that all of these parts of the Old Testament call us into a deeper faith, and that Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, is still pointing us in the same direction that Abraham, that Moses, that David, all of these heroes of faith were continually pointing us towards.
Yeah, that's a good description. I really like that, Isaac. And I picked up on a couple of things that are important in what you said, because so many times people in modern days, especially within the last maybe 20 or 25 years, in the churches that are following Jesus, they tend to see like our generation of believers and Christ followers as the replacement for those who have gone on before, instead of looking at those who have gone on before us as the foundation that we build our faith on. So we wouldn't even have a place at the table to experience faith if it hadn't been for those who went before us. And I think it's also important to understand that this particular reference to Abraham, I think, signaled to the Jewish people that the unknown author was writing to, because many of them were already following Christ, and some of them maybe were on the edge. Maybe they had some friends that were following Christ and they weren't sure. And so the author of Hebrews wants to point out that Abraham, before there ever was a church, God gave him a message: pack up your belongings and follow me to a new country. And then Abraham had to take an incredible leap of faith to do that. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know what was going to happen to him. This was even before God had promised him children, even a nation of children. And so this important leap of faith that Abraham set up for his descendants and comes down to us today represents the fact that even we as modern Christ followers today often have to step out in a leap of faith, not knowing where we're going. Is that kind of like the way it felt for you? Because when you accepted the call, because I got to give you a little background. When Isaac was still an undergraduate student at Eureka College, he came to me one day in my office seeking some serious consultation for direction, spiritual direction. He felt a very strong pulling in his heart that God might be calling me into ministry, but I'm not sure if that's the path that I should follow. He also had a strong leaning and a yearning for teaching or for medicine. And we spent, an hour and a half, 2 hours talking about that. And I prayed at the end that God would not send him into ministry, but to lead him in the direction that he should go. And he became a teacher, went to South Korea to teach English to Korean students as a second language. He did that until later. You came back, that tug in your heart just wouldn't go away. But when you answered it, did you have any idea where you would be going?
No, not at all.
So tell us a little bit about that journey that leap of faith took you on.
Yeah, and to fill in a little bit then for all of you too, that's what I tell this story again and again because of my education, because of this ordination track that I'm in. And I wanted us to have this moment where we could share that with this congregation in full. And going back to that moment when I was about to go to Eureka, and we were in your office, and I know these were not the words that you said, but I remember feeling like that there was a door where I was going to study medicine, biology and chemistry. There's a door where I was going to study teaching. And there's a door where I was going to study of religion and philosophy and go into ministry. And you said to me, Isaac, it's like you think one door leads to heaven and the other two lead to hell. And you saying that was just like, oh yeah, that makes no sense at all. So you said something really profound that took that stress off of me. You said, whatever door you choose, whatever path you go on, God will be on that journey with you. And you shared with me some scripture of saying, although you'll plan what path you go on, you'll try to plan your footsteps, it is God that will decide them. So
I remember that.
I decided to go into medicine. I studied biology and chemistry. It took me around the world, actually. It wasn't until I was also at kind of a weird Disciples of Christ connection, our denomination. It took me all the way to central India, to a tiny little town called Mugelli. And some of you got to hear me talk about that a little bit. But I don't know if I talk too much about. There were two medical students there. They were in their last years of medicine. I thought I was going to look up to them and learn so much from them. And I was about to press send on my applications to medical school because I had taken the MCAT, I had done everything. And when you're in central India and you have almost no one else to talk to, and every night, me and these two medical students, we would have phenomenal talks, and they are very different from me. I learned a lot from them, and we gained a bizarre trust with each other. Towards the end of my time there, they looked at me and they said, Isaac, you are excited about so many things. And we have now been in medical school for 6 years and we don't have any money. They said, if you are excited about so many other things, go and do those things. God will bring you back to medicine if that's really where you're supposed to be. So, did I go straight into ministry? No, I ran away to Korea. And that was a wonderful place. I really didn't know what was going to happen there. I wasn't sure if I was going to find a church. I was telling myself I can relax. I can, take it slowly when I got there, but I didn't need to get plugged in any place really quickly. And I laugh now because that first Saturday night, I was sitting in a room right outside of Seoul, Korea. I knew no one. I didn't speak very much Korean at all. There was almost no one around me that spoke English. And I was looking for some sort of community. And gosh darn it, I went to a church the next day just to find that community, to bring me back into a faith that was pulling me towards a belief that we can make the world better. So I came back from Korea, and that is finally when God said, it is time to start taking this call a whole lot more serious. And that is when I started in the Explorer program in Northeast Ohio, where I was enjoying working in churches, but I wasn't quite sure that it was supposed to be my exact calling to be a pastor. But there were so many people that I like to think of partially my ancestors in faith that said, it's your time to go. It is your time to start that track of ordination. Maybe you don't have to jump with 2 feet right now. Maybe take one little step. Just faith the size of a mustard seed and see what happens. And I got pulled in. Now, yes, that's where I am at. That hopefully 1 year, by faith, if everything goes well, this will be the sanctuary where I will be ordained into the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. It means a lot to me because this is also the place where I grew up, where Eden Joy is back there at 2 weeks. And my mom likes to remind me that she took me here maybe younger than 2 weeks. A few days old. That this is the place where I entered into the waters and the baptismal behind me, wondering what is the mystery of walking a Christian life, joining in a Christian journey. And that this is the place now where I will start another part of that journey into ordination. So, Dwight, tell me about any leaps of faith in your life.
Well, yeah, so, where God had been putting in your heart, maybe to call you, and eventually did put it in your heart to call you. And you were young enough and at a point where seminary, seemed like a sensible idea for finding a track into this vocation that we call ministry, full-time ministry. I, on the other hand, I was happily working in a factory at Caterpillar, making a good living for us. I'd been a serious student of scriptures for many years, faithful church attender with my wife. I had even filled in the pulpit a few times for Reverend Scotty Houston when he was at camp or when he was sick. But I never dreamed of becoming a minister, even, and to make a long story short, which is really hard for a preacher to do, the people of Howard Street Christian Church were in between ministers, and when Scott Woolrich came and led us in a discerning process of what we should do, and figured out we couldn't call a full-time pastor, and he said you could call somebody from the community, maybe with not a degree in ministry, but a degree in maybe library or teacher or something like that, and who has the necessary skills for ministry to do that, bivocationally. And I remember Marcy Flores, very excited, and said, oh, Scott, does it have to be a teacher? Does it have to be a librarian? Can it be a factory worker? And so one thing led to another, and they called me to be their pastor. Thank God that the Christian Church Disciples of Christ have a path for licensed, now commissioned ministry that people can pursue by following certain guidelines and requirements from the ministry committee at the regional level. And I followed that, thinking that this is where, this leap of faith is taking me, to be the pastor of this church, and that it would never go any farther than that. I never dreamed that one day after I had retired from Caterpillar, it would lead me to a part-time chaplain position with Methodist Hospital, a major hospital in Central Illinois. And that from there, it would eventually lead me to a almost full-time job as a chaplain with Hospice Compassus before this church called me to be their part-time pastor. The point is that when we take that leap of faith, we never know where it's going to lead us. It's a little bit frightening at times, but it's also very thrilling and very exciting. And it's not just a leap of faith for ministers, it's for every one of you. I tell people that, look, I was 44 years old. I was having a midlife crisis. It was either buy a sports car or go into ministry. I couldn't afford a sports car. And maybe none of you will ever be pulled by God into a full-time ministry like Isaac and I have been done. But you have to remember, it's not just those who are called to full-time ministry. God has made each and every one of you a minister for Jesus Christ in your own way, in your own circle of influence, by sharing your love and by telling the good news, just the simple good news of Jesus' love. You can have an impact on people that Isaac and I will never reach, or any other minister. You'll be the scriptures for them. You'll be the good news of Jesus Christ for them. And I remember, the first time I went to licensed minister summer school in Lexington Theological Seminary in Lexington, Kentucky. I was so nervous. I didn't know what I was going to find when I went to this licensed minister summer school. Well, I found that professors were just amazing and open and warm and helpful. And the other licensed ministers that were there with me, they were all in the same boat I was in. They had never been to seminary. They were on the same track for ministry that I was on. And I remember the first day we were on lunch, and Louise Brown was one of the licensed ministers from Kentucky. And we finished lunch early. We had about 20 or 30 minutes before class started again. And we went for a walk. And I asked her about her story, and she asked me about my story. So we told each other our stories. And I said, Louise, I just can't wrap my mind around this. how God would choose somebody like us to call into full-time ministry for him, when we've never even been to seminary. And I'll never forget Louise Brown's answer. Well, now, Dwight, you have got to always remember and don't ever forget, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. Amen. Well, the very first day that you accepted Jesus into your heart, you were called. You were called to a life of faith that causes you, called to a life of faith that causes you to take a leap of faith in so many instances that you probably haven't even been aware of now. But from this point forward, remember, if God's opening an opportunity for you to share God's love, to share the story of Jesus Christ, it's a leap of faith for you to do that for Jesus and his kingdom.
Yeah. You're reminding me of one of the mentors that I had in Ohio, who just had this phenomenal story that he loved to build up all this suspense and say that the most amazing sermon, the one that really changed his life once he became a Christian, was a sermon kind of like this one that was talking about, oh, you are called, you are called, you are called. And he would love to just, when we were in the car together, to say, oh, you'll never guess what that calling was to. That's what you guess. Oh, you're going to seminary, you're going to be a missionary. And he would look you straight in the eyes and say, I am called to go work at State Farm Insurance. And he said, I'm happy for people to laugh at that. That was by far the deepest calling. But he said, I am called to be there with my coworkers, to serve people well, to do my job to the best of my ability, to be walking out in faith. That the things that I am doing are blessed by God, that are building towards a world that is better to come, a world that's filled with love and hope, peace and joy.
And he calls all of us to continue to try to build a better world where there's more love, more hope, more joy than we've had ourselves in our lifetime. And that's the call that he's put on your heart. So it's time to get up and go out and follow that call, take that leap of faith, and follow him no matter where it takes you. Because he will be on that road before you get there, waiting to walk with you. Amen. Oh, this has been just a delight for me. And not surprisingly, the hymn of invitation that we have selected for today is, I have decided to follow Jesus. How about that? It is on page 344 in your hymnals. I always like to extend an invitation. If there's anybody here today who has not yet received Jesus in your heart, think about that while we're singing the song. If God moves you to make that choice and that decision, it's the first time for you. If you want to come up and let that decision be made known, we'll be happy to receive you into that group of that body of believers we call followers of Christ. If you're wanting to be baptized, we can make arrangements for that to happen. If you're from another land and going back to that place, you can make sure that you get baptized in your own hometown. And also, if there's anybody out there who are already baptized believers and just looking for a place to call your church home, we would be happy to be that church home with you. You can make that decision known also. And for our people out there in Zoom land, and people who pick this up, catch this later on YouTube, if this message has sparked a desire in your heart to know more about God, to know more about following Jesus, just call our church office. And if I'm not there, I'll get the message later and I'll call you back if you want to talk about God and Jesus. The number is 309-699-8631. And so for everybody who has already decided to follow Jesus, we invite you as we sing this song to remember the calling that God put in your heart, to remember the leap of faith that you took to follow him, and to remember that he's still calling you to new adventures in faith. Come, let us stand and sing together.